Ethan Carter had never imagined that a day would come when he'd need a disguise just to step inside the very store that bore his name. But that morning, wearing a worn-out hoodie, faded jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low enough to shadow most of his face, Ethan stood in the center of the Carter Cycle showroom like a complete stranger. A stranger in the very world he had once considered his greatest pride. He wasn't there to check sales reports or analyze market share. What he needed couldn't be found in spreadsheets or dashboards. Ethan had come to listen to the things reports would never dare to say out loud. The whispers in dim corners, the sideways glances, the thick silences between what was said and what was meant. With a carefully prepared fake name tag and a fabricated backstory about being a recently retired software engineer looking to pick up cycling as a new hobby, Ethan slipped into character effortlessly. No one even blinked. No one recognized the founder of the West Coast's most successful bicycle dealership chain, the same man whose face once graced the covers of top business magazines, the same mind that had signed off on every detail of the space he was now quietly studying. A young employee walked up to him with a bright smile, introducing him to the high-end models, following all the exact procedures Ethan had once developed for training new staff. The pitch was smooth, professional, and structured. From the outside, everything appeared to be in perfect working order. But that appearance was only skin deep. When Ethan stopped in front of the latest high-performance model, the most expensive bike in the entire showroom, he froze, not because of the bike, but because of the voices murmuring behind him. To say it's defective. Ray'll handle it overnight. Half price, no paperwork, no trace. Gotta be an insider. Outsiders, forget it. Ethan felt as though his body turned to stone. His ears rang for a moment, but those words rang louder than anything around him. Ray. Half price, no paperwork. His hand was still resting on the handlebars, but in his mind, the foundation he had built this empire upon was beginning to crack. This wasn't just a customer service issue like he had hoped. No, this was deeper, darker, and more dangerous. His heart thudded heavily inside his chest, but on the outside he forced himself to move slowly, appearing casual as he walked past rows of gleaming bikes. To anyone else, he looked like a man simply browsing, but inside, a storm was rising. A storm fueled by betrayal and disbelief. No paperwork, half price, insiders only. Those weren't idle complaints. Those were signals, indicators of a black market operation running beneath the polished surface of Carter Cycles. A front so clean it gleamed like the carbon frames on display. Yet something inside was rotting. He stopped beside a high-end touring model and pretended to check the drivetrain, glancing at the mirrored showroom panels. He caught the reflection of the two suspicious men. They were now browsing the helmets, badly feigning interest. One of them, wearing a leather jacket and cargo pants, smirked as he pulled out his phone. 11 tonight, behind the maintenance bay, products ready, Ray's bringing it. There it was again, that name. Ray. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. Ray Martinez, Carter Cycles logistics manager, the man responsible for inventory flow, warehouse access, shipping confirmations, everything. Ethan had hired him, trusted him, even shook his hand at company celebrations, welcomed him into the leadership circle. And now? That same name was being whispered in a shady deal, right in the heart of his flagship store. Ethan didn't react. He stood there quietly, like a man who had just discovered that his house had been burning from underneath the floorboards all along. He had once prided himself on the Carter values, business ethics, transparency, integrity. But now those words felt brittle, fragile, like a painting shaking on a wall during an earthquake. And the most painful part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization that the betrayal came from within, from the very people he had placed his deepest trust in, or at least Ethan thought he had known Ray Martinez. A man in his early 40s. Clean record, previously employed by several major bike shops across California. Never late, never a single complaint, everything in place, the kind of employee you'd list as a model example. In fact, just a few months ago, Ethan had publicly praised Ray during a leadership meeting for designing a new audit protocol to reduce inventory losses. Now that very same man seemed to be the one draining the system from within. And if that was true, then Ray wasn't working alone. He stayed in character, continuing to test bikes. He mounted a sleek matte deckback carbon model, resting his hands on the handlebars while discreetly scanning the showroom. Across the floor, Jessica, the employee who had greeted him earlier, was chatting with a middle-aged couple. She was doing everything by the book. Friendly, informative, never pushy. A textbook sales associate. But now, Ethan didn't know what to believe anymore. Jessica had joined the company just 3 months ago. She was Ray's first direct hire. Back then, no one questioned it. Her resume had been flawless. Too flawless. And now, that same perfection triggered something cold in Ethan's gut. He'd seen this kind of file before, and it never ended well. Unable to keep up the act much longer, Ethan cut the visit short. He thanked everyone, gave the name Mark, but left his real phone number just to see if anyone would follow up. It was a quiet trap, and he needed someone to step into it. But instead of heading home, he slipped into a small cafe just 5 minutes from the dealership. Tucked away in a quiet corner with a steaming espresso, he opened his laptop and accessed Carter Cycle's internal admin system, a private portal known only to him and a handful of top-level IT staff. The data poured in. Transactions, inventory logs, shipment records. Everything at a glance seemed normal. Too normal. But Ethan wasn't looking at the surface. He searched specifically for the Ducati Carbon V4, the exact model he'd overheard in that shady conversation. The system reported 10 units received, 8 sold, 2 remaining. But something didn't add up. The system listed both remaining units as damaged during transit, sent to maintenance for inspection. Yet Ethan had just seen one displayed proudly on the showroom floor, which meant the other was missing. No inspection reports, no shipping ID, just one vague entry, transferred to tech storage. He kept digging. Serial numbers, timestamps, staff IDs. No wonder. Every breadcrumb, every movement, every anomaly led to one name. Ethan opened Ray's profile and scanned through his work schedule. At first, nothing stood out, but then a pattern emerged, one that sent a jolt through Ethan's spine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Ray had volunteered for night shifts. The reason listed? Post-horse inventory audits. And these shifts weren't logged in detail. The security system only retained camera footage for 48 hours, unless movement triggered an alert for long-term storage. And if Ray had learned how to manipulate camera angles or tamper with settings, everything he did could vanish, like it had never happened. Ethan felt a chill crawl through him. It wasn't just how elaborate the operation seemed. It was how calmly and consistently it had been executed, with the kind of ease that only comes when someone knows no one is watching. He turned to Jessica's file next. On paper, she was spotless. No prior infractions, no questionable behavior. Before joining Carter Cycles, she had worked at 2 bike shops, one in Nevada, one in Oregon. Both had shut down within the past year. The listed reasons: restructuring and financial strain. Ethan opened a new browser tab and searched the names of those shops. What he found made his stomach sink. Both businesses had been under investigation for inventory fraud. No charges were ever filed. There hadn't been enough evidence. And Jessica? She had left just as each investigation began. Back then, she had been labeled a model employee, the kind no one ever questioned, just like now. Ethan closed his laptop slowly and motioned for another coffee, this time iced. He needed to stay alert. What he was facing wasn't some isolated misconduct. This was a network. Structured, strategic, coordinated, with roles assigned and a clear exit strategy in place. And somehow he, the founder, had become the last to know. He took a mental step back. Why Carter Cycles? Why now? Name flashed into his mind like a flicker of lightning. Derek, the longtime sales manager, the man who had been by his side since the beginning. Gruff, no nonsense, all business. Ethan had always chalked up his bluntness to personality, never to disloyalty. But lately, Derek had been suspiciously absent during Ray's night shifts. Ethan remembered a recent staff meeting. Derek had proposed loosening warehouse checks to relieve operational pressure. And suddenly the puzzle pieces began to click into place. Ray handled the product. Jessica filtered the clients. Derek made sure no one asked the wrong questions. Ethan opened a fresh note file and began compiling everything. Vague disappearance logs, overlapping shift patterns, names with potential connections. Every entry was time-stamped, encrypted. It needed to be airtight in case it had to be handed over to federal authority. He didn't call internal security. That department was led by Michael, a longtime friend. But Ethan had lost the luxury of blind trust. If this scheme had gone undetected for months, it couldn't have been limited to 3 people. Someone had to disable the cameras. Someone had to adjust the data. Someone had to sign off on forged documentation. And if Michael was one of them, Ethan couldn't jump to conclusions, but he couldn't ignore the possibility either. Suddenly, his phone buzzed, an unknown number. He picked up, voice calm and in character. Mark Thompson speaking. A gravelly voice replied, slow and deliberate. Mark, this is Rio over at Carter. Heard you're looking for something special. I might be able to help. You free tonight? Ethan's jaw tightened. The trap was setting itself. He modulated his tone, casual and disinterested. Yeah, someone said you might help me find something, not exactly on the showroom floor. There was a pause, then Ray responded, part joke, part test. I've got a few things not everyone knows about. Better to talk in person. After 11, behind the maintenance lot. No cameras, no eyes, just real bike lovers. Ethan didn't miss a word. This wasn't just a side hustle. This was a black market deal disguised as passion. He confirmed the meetup briefly, then hung up. Inside his mind, strategies churned like gears in an overworked engine. He leaned forward, elbows on the cafe table, eyes locked on the street outside. The game had begun. And this time, Ethan was stepping in not as the hunter, but as the bait, to pull the mask off every lie. The night air was heavy with mist. Through it, Carter Cycles still glowed in the distance, but the soft halo of lights no longer evoked pride in Ethan. All he could see now was a crack. Small, yes, but spreading like rot through everything he had built with sweat, heart, and unrelenting care. This wasn't just about stolen bikes. It was about honor. About the trust customers had placed in the Carter name. About every late night, every sacrifice he and his team had made for a dream now teetering on the edge. Ethan unlocked his phone and scrolled through his contacts. His thumb paused over one name. Linda Chen, an FBI agent he had worked with years ago on a carbon frame design theft case. She had a mind like a spine made of steel. He typed quickly. Something serious happening at Carter. Can't trust anyone inside. Need to meet tonight. Within 2 minutes, she replied. Sand location, bringing surveillance gear and covert team. Ethan let out a long breath. Not relief, but resolve. He was no longer alone. He left the cafe but didn't go home. Instead, he rented an old electric bike from a lot behind the plaza and began circling the Carter Cycles building from a distance. Scouting. The tech yard, the loading dock, the maintenance bay, even the side fire escape he once thought was irrelevant. Every shadow now felt like a clue. Every routine movement now held potential risk. By 9 p.m., Ethan returned to his temporary apartment, his base during this entire undercover operation. He changed clothes. No theatrics, no disguises, just practical layers in dark tones, a fitted black t-shirt, a lightweight jacket, shoes that made no sound on pavement. In his pocket, a miniature body camera, a wireless mic synced directly to Linda's FBI team. He repeated the plan to himself like a mantra. Don't break character. Don't engage. Observe. Record. Let the law handle the rest. To use him 57 p.m., Ethan pulled up to the rear maintenance lot in an unregistered rental vehicle. Headlights cut early. He parked nearly 260 feet from the meetup point and approached by foot through a narrow side path. From a distance, he could already make out a tall figure, broad-shouldered, scanning the area while tapping something on his phone. Not Ray. Michael, the head of security. Ethan didn't flinch. He just nodded internally. Another confirmation. Ray moved the merchandise. Jessica vetted the buyers. Derek maintained the silence. And Michael? Michael kept the evidence buried. 1103.A side van doors slid open. Ray stepped out, pushing a blanket-covered bicycle, a carbon frame model Ethan himself had approved for import only 2 weeks earlier. Retail value over $11,000. 0 cents. No gloves, no disguise. Ray wasn't worried, because he thought no one outside the circle knew. Think that was his fatal mistake. A man with a high-end watch stepped forward, the same man Ethan had seen in the showroom earlier. They shook hands. Quick, quiet, cold. The deal was beginning. From the shadows, a small flicker of light blinked and disappeared. Linda Chen's signal, surveillance, was live. Ethan hailed sharply, then stepped forward into the clearing like he belonged there. I'm Mark, Ray said. We spoke this morning. Ray grinned with confidence. Perfect timing. That Ducati you asked about, ready to go. 40 grand, no papers, no trace. Ethan crouched to inspect the bike. His fingers glided across the frame where the camera embedded in his jacket recorded everything. Scratched serial number, scrubbed QR code, peeled off labels. Ray wasn't just selling stolen bikes. He was erasing their identity. And then headlights blazed from both sides. A voice thundered across the lot. FBI, hands in the air, nobody move. Panic detonated, chaos scattered. Ray dropped the bike and bolted toward the fence. Ethan, without hesitation, sent his location to the tactical team and sprinted around the side to cut Ray off. They met face to face. No pretense, no masks. Just a man who had trusted and a man who had betrayed. Ray growled, "You should have stayed in your office, Carter." Ethan didn't answer. His eyes said everything, burying the last illusion of loyalty. Ray was cuffed. Within minutes, Linda's team had Michael, Jessica, and Derek in custody. None of them had time to destroy evidence. The notebooks, the tampered serials, the dummy accounts. It was all seized in less than 20 minutes. As the final handcuff clicked around Michael's wrist, Ethan didn't feel relief. He felt empty. Not because of the bikes, but because of the trust that had been stolen. And yet, deep down, he knew he had done the right thing. He hadn't looked away. He hadn't covered it up. And that was the first step toward healing what had been broken. The FBI's temporary headquarters in South Seattle didn't look like much from the outside. It was a converted warehouse. No signboard, no emblem, just a heavy steel door that opened into another world. Inside, every word was recorded, every movement studied. It was a place where truths couldn't hide and every puzzle piece had to fit, exactly, without exception. Ethan Carter sat in interrogation room 3, not as a suspect, but as the key witness, the man who had unlocked the first door to expose an entire web of deception. The room was cold, clinical, but Ethan's mind burned with clarity. The door opened with a soft metallic creak. Agent Linda Chen stepped in, her hair pulled tightly back, her expression sharp and measured. She carried a thick file under one arm and placed it gently on the metal table. A slim monitor flickered to life, streaming live data directly from the agency's central server. On the screen, everything they had gathered from the previous night's takedown. She didn't ask a single question. Instead, she pushed the screen toward Ethan and said plainly, without any dramatics, "They didn't just steal bikes, Ethan. They stole your reputation, your trust, and if we had arrived even a few days later, they would have taken your entire system." Ethan leaned in. His eyes scanned the digital stream of damning evidence, maps of tampered serial numbers, photos of QR codes that had been shaved off, encryption logs. Everything. All of it had been buried within the very inventory software he had personally approved based on Ray's glowing recommendation. Linda pulled out a chair and sat, her tone calm but every syllable carried like a hammer. "We've confirmed it. Ray Martinez worked at no less than 3 other dealerships before joining Carter Cycles. All of them reported similar losses. In Oregon, nearly $200,000 0 cents in missing parts. In Nevada, a warehouse burned down just days after an audit began. In Colorado, over 20 unregistered vehicles were liquidated off the books. Nick's case had quietly shut down for the same reason. Not enough evidence, no reliable witness, no Ethan Carter. Ethan remained silent, but in his mind he could see Ray, the man who used to stride into board meetings with flawless reports, who dressed for every charity gala like he belonged on magazine covers. That same man was now in the next room, handcuffed, emotionless, unmasked. "A two-faced man," Linda continued, "living among a team you once called family." Her voice shifted, sharper now, but not cruel, just true. "We need you to do one more thing. According to the digital trail, it's clear you were being framed. All documentation pointed to you as the orchestrator. If this operation had been exposed without your internal testimony, a federal investigation would have targeted you, assets frozen, possible prosecution. You were their fallback plan." She paused, letting the gravity of it settle in. "They didn't just steal from you. They built their escape route by throwing you under the bus." Ethan exhaled slowly. He understood now. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was a game of precision. Every process had been subtly warped, just enough to create the illusion of a complicit boss, a man who looked the other way while profits disappeared. He leaned back in the chair. His palms still held the lingering pressure of the stolen bike's handlebars from the night before. He asked quietly, "How many people were involved?" Linda opened the file. One by one, she laid out the photos like cards at a high-stakes poker table. Michael's head of security had deliberately disabled the cameras on delivery nights. Jessica had identified high-profile buyers and kept in touch via burner phones. Derek's sales coordinator had helped legitimize fake invoices drafted by Ray and Jessica. But the most disturbing names, they were the ones Ethan had never expected. 2 warehouse technicians, a young finance employee who processed installment transactions. 7 people total. None of them had a full picture of the scam. Each only operated one small piece. But together it worked like a machine. Mechanical, clean, almost elegant in its efficiency. Approach the customer, simulate the sale, erase the evidence, divide the profit. Some transactions were even repeated, according to a script, 3 to 4 times per month. Linda pointed to the analytical report glowing on the screen. If this hadn't been caught, you'd be losing about $80,000, 0 cents every single month. Then she looked at him, with more weight behind her gaze. But the most dangerous part is this: every single one of those deals can be traced back to your system. They had planned for the worst-case scenario, and when it happened, all roads would lead straight to Ethan Carter, a man reborn as a criminal in the eyes of the law. Ethan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, not out of fatigue, but acceptance. Not of guilt, but of the truth he had ignored too long. He'd stopped paying attention. He had trusted systems more than people. He'd evaluated staff through clean charts and KPIs instead of gut instinct. And it had nearly cost him everything. When he opened his eyes again, they were clear, grounded. "I want to speak to the media," Ethan said. Directly, not through a lawyer, not filtered by... Linda tilted her head slightly, intrigued. "You sure that would tie your name to the scandal, even though you're the whistleblower?" Ethan nodded without hesitation. "I'd rather let people see I had the courage to face it than leave them in the dark." For the first time during the entire meeting, Linda allowed herself a smile. "You really aren't like most CEOs." But Ethan didn't take it as a compliment. He took it as an obligation. 2 days later, the name Carter Cycles was everywhere, on news tickers, blog posts, local television, but not for the thefts. For the way its founder chose to face the truth. There were no spin doctors, no rehearsed statements. Ethan Carter stepped into the center of the flagship showroom, not to sell bikes, but to own his story. The showroom that once echoed with sales pitches now held its breath as he spoke. Customers, reporters, employees, even skeptics. The local station broadcast it live. The FBI team stood quietly in the back. Ethan didn't open with excuses. He didn't blame others. He said one sentence that made the room go absolutely still. "Ultimately, I am responsible for what happened at this dealership. Even if I didn't commit the acts myself, I failed to see the warning signs soon enough." There was no applause, no clapping. No one left either. The silence became respect. He recounted the night he went undercover, the whisper in the showroom that changed everything, the slow rise of suspicion, the hollow rage of betrayal. "I used to believe procedures could protect a brand, but the truth is people are the real stronghold, and when I stopped seeing them, the cracks began to form." After the speech, the customer service line received over 300 calls in just 48 hours. But none of them were complaints. They were thank yous. One elderly man called simply to say, "My son served in the army. He said, when a commander steps up and takes the fall, that's someone you can trust." In an age when most bury their scandals, Ethan Carter did the rare thing. He held it up to the light. Linda met Ethan again, this time not in a dark room but in a bright glass conference space drenched in sunlight. She placed a thinner file on the table. "You know," she began, "this case just helped us unlock 2 more active investigations tied to the Golden Chain Gang network. These dealers weren't just stealing, they were laundering money on a global scale." Ethan nodded. He wasn't surprised. He had seen how seemingly minor decisions, delays, shortcuts, blind spots could evolve into something monstrous. "I want to make sure this never happens to another business." He proposed a nationwide interdealership fraud detection system, allowing motorcycle and bicycle dealerships to securely share data and alert each other to suspicious activity. The FBI signed on immediately. He called it Project Crossane. Linda Chen invited Ethan to take on a new role, civilian advisor to a growing coalition of small and mid-sized businesses working to root out organized fraud. He didn't hesitate. He didn't say yes for the accolades or for his name on another headline. He said yes because it was necessary. What he had gone through wasn't some stroke of lucky survival. It was a brutal education, a fire that burned away the illusion, leaving behind a hard-earned truth. And now, Ethan carried that truth like armor. Not to shield himself, but to protect others. At the same time, he began a much quieter journey, less visible but just as intense. Ethan set out to rebuild the culture inside Carter Cycles, not from the top down, but from the roots up. He didn't start with performance reviews or numbers. He started with something far more human: listening. He organized small group meetings, not to interrogate or reprimand, but to ask one question: what would it take for you to trust this place again? No buzzwords, no corporate spin, just silence and space for people to speak honestly. A young technician barely out of college finally broke the tension. His voice trembled. We need to know that if we report something suspicious, someone will actually believe us. Ethan didn't interrupt. He didn't argue or explain. He wrote it down, word for word, quietly. From those conversations, the Speak First, Stay Protected policy was born. A promise that any employee could report internal misconduct anonymously and would receive a leadership response within 72 hours, with zero retaliation. 3 weeks later, the transformation wasn't visible in the furniture or paint job. It wasn't in renovations. It was in the way people spoke. Customer greetings weren't rehearsed scripts anymore. They were personal, real. Employees didn't just sell bikes, they told a story. The story of a company that nearly collapsed from the inside and made a choice to rise with integrity. Carter Cycles had stopped being just a showroom. It had become a symbol of redemption, of rebuilding what matters. Ethan returned to the desk he used to sit at in the early days. It was small, tucked just behind the main floor. No soundproof glass, no towering boardroom table, just enough space for a laptop and a notebook. He told his team, "If the day ever comes when I stop seeing your faces, that's the day I go blind again." There was no applause. There didn't need to be. They just knew their leader was truly back. 3 months after the raid, Carter Cycles wasn't just surviving, it had undergone a deep, almost cellular change. Not on the surface, not in the brochures, but in its heartbeat. The showroom glass still gleamed, the premium sport bikes still hung in sleek, price-tiered rows, but no one walked through those doors thinking they were entering a typical retail store. They stepped into a place that had cracked open and healed. Ethan didn't chase revenue targets. He started small. Morning greetings, the way a customer's name was pronounced, the tone used when explaining a warranty, even how the security guard bowed his head, not to intimidate, but to welcome. Ethan believed honor was built not from grand gestures, but small choices, repeated daily. The internal training center wasn't a conference room anymore. He had converted part of the old warehouse into a hands-on learning lab. Here, new hires didn't just learn product specs. They learned how to listen. Through role-play, real-time feedback, and simulations pulled directly from past ethical breaches, they trained for 3 weeks before ever stepping onto the floor. There were no cold manuals, no dry lectures about ethics. Every session began with one simple question. If you were the customer today, how would you want to be treated? From there, they didn't avoid the company's dark past. They faced it. They confronted the old mistakes so they could walk forward into the light. Ethan was there for most sessions, not to lecture but to observe. He sat in the back, quiet, watchful, present. One afternoon, a young employee named Cole, who had come from a bankrupt bike shop, raised his hand and asked, "I thought you'd be teaching us how to close sales." Ethan smiled softly and replied, "No, I'm here to see if you're willing to ask why. before you say, "This is the best price." The room broke into warm laughter. But beneath it, something deeper stirred. A culture that didn't demand perfection, only courage. On a quiet Saturday morning, Ethan sat by the parts counter with a cup of coffee when an elderly couple entered the store. The husband walked with a cane. The wife moved slowly, bracing herself against her lower back. They weren't here to shop. They came to say thank you. A month earlier, their son, a military veteran struggling with PTSD, had enrolled in Carter Cycle's second ride program. The initiative was discreet. No marketing campaigns, no hashtags. It offered something rarer, a safe space for those grappling with emotional trauma to reconnect with the world through cycling. 3 training sessions, 1 custom-fitted bike. Their son, once too afraid to leave the house, was now out riding again, finding himself, 1 turn of the pedals at a time. The mother's eyes welled up as she spoke. "We didn't come here for the bikes. We came because your store helped our son come back to life." Ethan didn't say anything at first. He simply stood up, gently shook the father's hand, and pointed toward the training room. Above its doorway, a sign hung high in bold white letters. "We fix more than bikes." The second ride program was only one piece of Ethan's broader vision, a long-term initiative he called the Legacy Blueprint. There were no ads, no headlines, just stories. Quiet, powerful stories. Former inmates retrained as technicians. Single mothers learning how to assemble bikes for kids. Young adults once turned away for lack of experience, now given not just jobs, but a chance to grow. Ethan never called it charity. He called it what it truly was, an investment in trust. The one thing no dealership could stock on shelves, yet the only thing that could keep a business truly alive. 1 week later, Linda Chen returned to Carter Cycles not as an FBI agent, but as a regional security advisor for a new business alliance. Ethan welcomed her into his old office, untouched, exactly as it had been, a real wooden desk, a photo of the grand opening on the wall. Linda looked around and asked quietly, "You haven't changed anything?" Ethan shook his head, voice low. "No. This room witnessed the moment I lost control. I keep it this way so I never forget what that felt like." She didn't respond, but her eyes softened. Sometimes, we don't let go of pain to heal. We hold on to it, so we don't repeat it. Ethan gave her a full tour of the showroom. A group of young employees was coaching elementary students on bike safety, part of a new partnership with local schools. In another section, a community bike station allowed customers to donate used bicycles to be refurbished and gifted to families in need. In the far corner, a digital screen ticked upward. 12,400 people had participated in Carter's free cycling safety courses in just 2 months. Linda shook her head, half joking. "If you ever run for office, they'll probably call you the savior of the bike industry." Ethan smiled faintly. "I don't need a title. I just need to know that when someone sells a bike here, they don't have to bow their head." Outside the polished storefronts and showroom lights, something unexpected was happening. Dealerships that once dismissed Carter Cycles as an idealistic outlier were now following its lead. Across the West Coast and beyond, the new model was catching on, pairing service with community, trading rigid procedure for real values. Ethan didn't hoard the knowledge, and shared everything. Training protocols, internal policies, even opened up Carter's in-house learning lab for other businesses to come and observe. No paywalls, no NDA. Why? Because Ethan believed a strong industry wasn't built on secrecy, it was built on collaboration. Not on competition for market share, but shared responsibility for doing business the right way. And that idea began to ripple outward, from Washington to Oregon and even into the Midwest. People started calling it the Carter method. Ethan just called it the right way to do good. That afternoon, sunlight spilled gently across the row of bikes parked out front, glinting off chrome handlebars and custom paint jobs. But what filled Ethan Carter with pride wasn't what shimmered in the light. It was what couldn't be seen at all. The quiet, brave decisions made behind closed doors. The people who once made mistakes, now given a chance to start again. The customers who no longer felt like transactions, but like people who mattered. These victories didn't show up on sales charts or quarterly growth graphs. But Ethan knew. They were real. Trust was returning. Slowly, quietly. And this time, it ran deeper. At the next quarterly meeting, there were no growth graphs, no pie charts. Instead, Ethan stood up and introduced 5 new employees. Each had a story, but one stood out. Talia, once arrested as a teen for petty theft. Now, she led the customer bike care division. When she stood to speak, the room fell silent. She didn't offer a speech. She just said, "I used to live by hiding my face. Now every day I come here, I get to look someone in the eye and know I deserve to be here." Ethan nodded. No words were needed. As summer approached, Ethan launched a new initiative. Ride for Trust, a 10-day cycling journey across cities that housed Carter Cycles locations. But it wasn't a brand campaign. There were no giveaways, no press stunts. Each stop was a conversation about ethics in business, resilience in failure, and how to protect goodness in a world that too often forgets it. Participated former customers, loyal employees, supply chain partners. Even people who once walked away from Carter Cycles, only to return later, moved by how the company faced its darkest moment with open honesty. They didn't just ride, they told stories. And each story became living proof of Ethan's simple but powerful philosophy. Transparency doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real. On the final day of the ride, the group reached Seattle, the city where it had all begun. In the quiet plaza surrounded by downtown towers, hundreds of bicycles were arranged in the shape of the Carter Cycles logo. Ethan stood in the center, sunlight warming his shoulders. In his hand, he held something small but symbolic. A key, 3D printed from recycled aluminum sourced from damaged bikes recovered during the investigation. He knelt down and handed it to a 13-year-old boy who had just completed the first gear training course. "You don't need to keep the bike," Ethan said. "Faded, but hold on to this key to remind yourself that anyone can start over, even from something that's been broken." The journey of Carter Cycles was no longer the tale of one man building a bicycle empire. It was the story of a man who dared to dismantle everything, just to find out what was truly worth keeping. Ethan didn't need to be a hero. He just needed to be someone who didn't look away. And by making that one quiet, unwavering choice, he didn't just survive a crisis. He transformed it, not just into a comeback, but into a blueprint for doing better. On the last day of the quarter, after the final reports had been submitted and every meeting adjourned, the showroom slowly emptied. But Ethan stayed behind. He walked across the polished floor to a glass case in the corner. Inside, the very first bicycle he ever sold. He placed his hand gently on the handlebar, not to dust it off, but as if saying thank you. His past, to his younger self, to the version of him that dared to believe this was possible. Then he turned away, walking toward the office where the light was still on. Because there was still work to do. There's always work to do.